Welcome to another star-studded interview. This week we have got Daniel Edison. How are you, Daniel?
Great, Ian. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. As I think we've just kind of mentioned before we started recording, I am knackered and I would love to go to my bed, but duty calls. So, Daniel, what was it that sort of got you started in doing stand-up? And was it always kind of like puns and one-liners and wordplay that you would do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It started when I was a teenager. I'm at the ripe old age of 24 now. But I was like 16, a bit younger maybe. And I loved one-liner comics. I watched Tim Vine all the time. Milton Jones, Stuart Francis, all the guys you can probably think of. I was really, really into it. And I just knew I read joke books. I just loved something about the structure of a joke being this short and it's great, and that's enough. And I started thinking of my own ideas. I think because I watched so much of them, I kind of, after a while, I don't know, I just sort of started hearing puns in things people said, and I'd write them down. I'd come home from school with writing all over my hands. I should have been doing maths. I wasn't. I was just thinking of nonsense. And that carried on. And now today I've got a Word document that's a total mess. It's like 7,000 jokes long that I started for a laugh years ago, and it's just carried on. But that's very much it. I just watched a lot of the one-liner guys and really liked it.
So is that how, or was that just a turn of phrase, or is that how many jokes that you've got?
No, that's genuinely, it's around 7,000. Yeah. It's kind of the bulk. It's almost every idea, one-liner at least I've had. I write everything down, good or bad, and make it funny at some point.
So is that what you found? Is that like, because obviously sometimes you get that sort of hit of inspiration where you just write something down and it's the finished article. Like, do you have many, or do you find yourself sort of revising sort of earlier ideas? You're thinking there might be something in that, but you move on to the next joke and then you revisit it later. Is that your kind of is that part of your writing style at all?
Well, kind of. Well, I've got a note app on my phone just for more rough ideas, because I try to use that page for just roughly the finished idea. You know, it's one line, it's done. I use Evernote on my phone, which is a good app I recommend checking out for people who write jokes, or anything you need to remember. And it'll be a word or a certain thing or a certain phrase I meant to finish. When I finish that, it goes on the page, and I might tweet it. I spend way too long on Twitter, so you might see some of my stuff on there. But it's a mixture of both, yeah.
So how is it that you sort of mentioned that it's just sort of phrases that you hear that something just sparks in you?
Yeah.
Is there a particular sort of source of material that you look towards to write your material, or is it a whole load of different influences, or how is it you come up with the kind of the jokes that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that even now I wish I knew how to do it. I wish I knew how to write jokes. I think when you get in the certain habit of thinking of puns without even necessarily meaning to, you know, you watch some one-liner comics, thinking that way after a while, you start to hear phrases. People will say something, and you'll think, "Oh, this word sounds a bit like this word," or you could take that very differently. So, I'll give you an example. I tweeted recently. I put people claim that mind readers are too controversial. But they're just saying what we're all thinking. All right. Thank you. And that came from, I'm sure I heard someone somewhere just going, well, he's just, you know, it might have been like a Piers Morgan sort of story or something, and someone went, well, he's just saying what we're all thinking, you know. That kind of thing. One of those stories.
Sort of stuck.
Yeah, and I heard, well, who says what we're thinking? You could say mind reader, and it just came from that. But it's just an example. You just, and probably yourself, you hear people say things, or and occasionally your brain just wanders. I mean, very often actually, I'll be doing something totally different, and I'll think, oh, just a random pun idea pop into my head. I don't know why, and reach for a notepad or something before you forget it.
So do you? Because I know for me personally, look, when it comes to watching, because I mean, I did sort of like yourself, kind of Stuart Francis, Tim Vine, people of that kind of ilk. I would sort of watch it and just absolutely be blown away by it. Just loved what they do. But since I've sort of started getting into sort of like pun writing, I was going to say seriously, but as serious as you can type thing. I found myself shying away from watching a lot of the kind of bigger names, certainly doing their thing, just because I'm worried that I might sort of kind of duplicate their ideas. So that's not something obviously that kind of bothers yourself at all.
No, it isn't. I still really I can really enjoy that kind of thing. I mean, I went to see, it must have been 2019 now. Nothing's happened for the last year, has it? Event-wise, must have been 2019. Went to see Gary Delaney. Really loved it. A couple of times I thought, oh, I've got a rough idea similar to that one. So it does happen. A lot more than that I thought. I wish I wrote that one. So it does happen, but in a sense, it's not. There's no harm in knowing, because you don't want people to think, if you haven't seen it, people think potentially that you took their idea. I don't know. It's not a bad thing watching them, but it is quite upsetting when you're like, oh, I've got the same idea. And it does happen a lot. I remember seeing the last Tim Vine DVD and was like, yeah, I've got the idea. And it just happens. People think we're all sort of fishing from the same pool. And there's only so many words to play with. And that's just how it turns out.
Yeah, the parallel thinking is always there. Sort of when it does come to writing things that are just almost stock phrases. But it's the worry that sort of you've written something and then you find out someone else has done it and you're like, well, that's me not using that then. Yeah,
it is pretty gutting. You mentioned about how to write jokes. One thing I do occasionally, and the only problem with it is it can be a bit unoriginal because they are stock phrases, but you can look up idioms, which I've done occasionally, and I've got some good jokes out of that before by just twisting the phrase as much as I could. But they can come out quite samey, and so I've only got literally, I think, maybe 2 jokes out of doing that.
Right.
But it worked out as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole sort of wealth of sort of material out there that you can garner kind of jokes from, whether it is like kind of online things, just things you hear in passing, things at work or whatever. So what would you say is sort of the proudest moment you've had in joke writing, where you've written something and thought, that's me retiring?
I mean, in terms of joke writing, whenever I put a joke out, so for Twitter, for example, which I do use a lot, I won't necessarily tweet everything. I couldn't. It would be ridiculous. But I do tweet some ideas. Some of them I like, some of them I love, some of them I'm not sure on. When I tweet something and it goes very well and gets a great response, that's a proud thing. My biggest joke is about 5 years ago, and I've never beaten it. It's like crazy numbers, thousands of retweets. Never beaten it. And it was a fairly throwaway, I thought. I did not think it was very good. The joke was, if you want to hear it, the joke was, see, I love it. I do enjoy it now. And I've done it over the years in stand-up since. But when I wrote it, I thought this isn't very good. The joke was, I wish I could stop naming Bruce Willis films. I guess Old Habits. Pulp Fiction. It's ridiculous. But I do enjoy, typically, if it's a rowdier crowd as well, I've had it where I go, Old Habits, they go, Die Hard, and I go, Pulp Fiction. And it's quite fun in that way.
It takes the edge off what the actual joke is.
Yeah, because, I mean, the joke, I wrote down Old Habits, Die Hard, and I thought it's very obvious. And it was, again, one of those things where I had a note down on a document, and I found it months later, and I thought, actually, I can change that, make it a completely different movie, throw people off, and that's funnier than just going straight for the obvious. I can't explain why that did well, but people like it.
Well, that's it. I mean, there are some jokes that, as you say, you've just written as a throwaway joke, and it becomes like a really good joke. But sort of conversely, have you had the experience where you've thought, right, that is a fantastic joke. It's going to get 1 million retweets, all the rest of it. I'm going to get an applause break when I do it. when I'm doing my live stand up, and nothing happened.
Totally. Trying to think of one. It's really hard to think of one. Well, it's probably too many of them. I'm trying to think of one in particular as an example. I'm not sure, but there are certainly, that does happen. Yeah, you can be wrong. The audience are the ones who tell you what's funny and what's not. You can have an idea, but you're not necessarily right. And friends and family might say yes to humour you, or they do like it, but they know you. It's not a fair assessment.
Yeah.
So the audience.
The real proof is in the kind of the live audience that sort of don't know you at all. Yeah. So how long is it that you've been sort of performing comedy?
I started very young, and I was like 16.
So did you have to lie about getting into certain venues and things like that, or what was the?
Strangely not. Just some clubs are really cool about it and said it's fine. Like, I sent them some clips at the time, little videos, and they liked it and said, look, it's okay. There were actually a couple, looking back now, and I hadn't thought about this kind of thing in a long time. There were some, that went, unfortunately, no. But largely, it was okay. I just didn't want to lie, I guess. I should have done. I should lie all the time. It's way easier.
So what would you say has been like your best gig? What's your favourite gig that you've done?
Favourite gig? This is going to sound corny to say it, but my first ever experience on stage is still what I think of as a surreal thing. So I started, my first ever thing I ever did on stage was with Tim Vine.
Right, nice.
I'm not sure how well known, if people know that, but I went to see him. I was recently left school. I went with my brother, and it was a Tim Vine chat show, as he calls it. It was the tour, so he got people on stage, but they agreed to it beforehand. It was a bit more of a loose kind of show. But I was sat in the front row, and he did a bit where he asked everyone what they did, sort of jobs and stuff. And he got to me, and I said, "Well, I've just left school, I haven't got a job." And he played on that, riffed on that for a little bit. I actually met him before the show because I brought his joke book, and he signed it for me to Daniel, so he knew my name at that point. He said, "Oh, so you're the one who bought it?" So he said to me. My brother, whilst I was saying what I did or don't do for a living, my brother went, "He writes jokes," which I never would have thought to mention. I wouldn't say that kind of thing. Particularly then. I think the standards hopefully improved now, but I'm not sure how good it was. And Tim went, "Oh wow, okay, let's see then. Welcome to the stage, Daniel." And that was that.
So how did you feel at that point when you're getting invited up onto stage, just by Tim Vine being told, "Hey, he's a joke writer," and you get that sort of pressure? How did that feel?
It was all so quick and incredibly unexpected. I had never written a routine. I just had written loads of jokes, so I had to think of stuff randomly that was funny. That's not an easy thing to do. But looking back, it was also quick, and it's good that I managed to think of stuff. If I was to overanalyze it, I'd say it's petrifying. But in the moment, it was just, this is what's happening. Okay, let's do it. And it was very quick. And I had no routine, nothing. Literally never written a routine, just had loads of one-liners and had to think of some. And he was my favourite, he still is my favourite comedian ever. So he's actually on YouTube. I look like a fetus. Right. I can't bear to watch it, but it's on there. I just can't watch it. And so that was a huge deal for me. And after that, the actual club I was at, Matt's Comedy Club, booked me for my first ever 5-minute spot. I was literally forced by Tim Vine to do stand-up. And the club booked me, and I went from there. But that's what I'd say. It was such a strange thing. Yeah. And the first time I was ever on stage, but it definitely sticks in my mind as a really big deal to me. Even though
kind of a landmark moment type thing. Because basically you were sort of almost forced to do it. It wasn't a sort of conscious decision of, I'm going to give this a go. It's sort of you went up and you've obviously done not too badly at it at all, and then you've got other gigs and obviously progressed from there. From it, so it's not a bad way to start. Certainly not a bad.
I would recommend trying to get forced to do it because it might be the best way. if you overthink stuff, it can become quite a
Yeah.
a block, and you struggle with overthinking things. If you're forced to do it, you've got no choice. So it worked out for the best.
So where is it that you? Where's your favourite places to perform? Like even areas of the country, or even certain types of venues?
Yeah, sure. A club I really liked, did a few years ago, was Outside the Box in Kingston. And you go in there, and it doesn't really look like a particularly nice club. It's quite run down looking, and it's been there a long time. And it's not a particularly big club. It's quite small. But the people that go there just love to go watch comedy, and it really felt like that. I only did it once, but that one is one that sticks in my mind. It was just a really great. I remember doing the first joke, actually. I've got a recording of this gig, so I saw it some time ago, doing the first joke, and there was silence for about 3 seconds, and then laugh. It's like, oh, okay, he's a one-liner guy, okay, because that's like, if they don't know that, and it's very different from a storyteller or something. So to go, good evening, and then punchline can be a bit strange. But yeah, that's one that sticks in my mind. Regarding favourite club, I just mentioned Matt's Comedy Club there. It's a family-friendly club based in Worthing. And I've worked with him quite a number of times, and I've always enjoyed that. I've always sort of adapted quite easily to it, because family-friendly is 99.9% of what I end up writing anyway, without meaning to. It's how I think. So it was never a challenge. I remember speaking to acts before a certain gig, and they were like, oh, I've had to rewrite this whole thing to be family-friendly, and I felt a bit quietly smug. I'm like, it's fine. Got away with it. But yeah.
Because, I mean, like, for example, myself, I can say fuck every other word. You know what I mean? But in my jokes, they're not crafted that way. Yeah. I might have, I don't know, maybe about 10 jokes that have got the word fuck or something like that in them. The rest of them, it just doesn't lend itself to this kind of comedy.
Yeah, I think it's because maybe because it's just silly. There's no truth to anything you say. So a swear word doesn't necessarily feel like it's needed. It can give emphasis on a punchline, but I think it can feel a bit like an easy laugh. So I can't think of anything I'd need to chuck a swear word in. Not that some jokes don't need it, depending on what you're talking about. It could be a sexual thing or whatever. A certain word might be needed, but I don't really do it too much. I've only written literally a handful of dirty jokes in the entire time I've done it, which is not like, that's not out of choice. I like that kind of stuff. I find it funny. You know, but
it's just not what springs to mind when you sort of sit down with that.
I don't mind it at all. Dirty humor is just not generally what I think of that much. And so my act's always been really clean. There's a couple of jokes in there that are a bit more edgy sort of thing. Not edgy, but a bit more blue, I suppose. Yeah. And that kind of gets a bigger laugh because I never do them. So when you hear one, it's a bit more of a reaction rather than doing it all the time.
Cool. Is there any sort of gigs that stick in your mind where you think, I mean, don't need to name any places or anything, but says, oh, I just don't want to do that again, or is giving you a bit of cause for concern about sort of continuing? Basically, when's the worst that you've died on your hole? That's basically what the question is.
Oh, I don't know. The weird thing is, once you've done it for a while and you get used to either going really well or going okay or doing badly, it kind of becomes not as big a deal anymore. So you take it and you don't really worry about it anymore. So not one in particular springs to mind. There are certainly gigs where it hasn't gone well and you leave going, oh, that was not very good. Yeah. But hopefully on to the next one. So nothing in particular. There are obviously somewhere that's happened. It does happen. Particularly, I've made the mistake in the past of being a bit too clever, I think. Like, I love clever, wordy puns, and for the right audience, that works, and they like that. For the wrong audience, if they're quite drunk, maybe, or a bit rowdy, they're not maybe going to want to hear a load of clever, complicated puns that require listening to and proper thinking. So I think occasionally, maybe just doing the wrong gig sometimes, gigs that maybe don't suit me, or a bit of a rowdy club. But you can't necessarily foresee that happening, can you? It's not really. You learn from that, though.
Yeah, absolutely. But would you sort of say you're going to do a set? You've been booked to do a set. Yeah. And you're got it all prepared in your head. You're just about to go in and you look at the crowd and say, this isn't going to fly tonight. Do you press on or do you adjust to maybe put in, again, like a sort of a rugby crowd, a stagnating crowd type thing? Would you put in a few more fuck shit jokes, or would you just do with what you've planned? Go ahead with what you've planned.
Honestly, I always just end up doing what I plan. There's certainly been times when I've gone like, yeah, they'd probably like this more. This is a bit more dirty. I'll try this, and it tends to work. But I haven't got enough of them, so I can't really pad it out. Basically, they get in the puns. If they don't like them, that's on them. They have no choice. They have to sit through this torture for both of us.
You will sit through this, and if you don't like it, then well, you'll be sitting through it anyway. So what would you say, well, how is it that you sort of memorize your jokes, sort of memorize your set? Is there, do you get any sort of particular technique or?
Yeah. I'd love to say I've got a really planned out, methodical way of doing it. Not really. I tend to write them, the ones that are on the similar subject will be in this area here, sort of a block of jokes about, you know, girlfriends or that kind of thing. Or you have sports. And I try to have them so in my head it goes to the next section.
Sure.
It doesn't always work out, because occasionally if I do a longer bit, which is rare, but I do sometimes, and I think, yeah, a short joke after that would give that more punch, because you go from a longer bit to a kind of short one-liner, gets them back on in that rhythm. It might not be about the same subject, because I might not have one that's long on that subject. So not all the time, but more often than not, they're linked on the same kind of area.
Right.
And I just memorize it and rehearse it a ton. I've tried the memory palace technique, which is what Garrett Delaney mentions, which is you sort of imagine in your head walking through your house or an area you know really well, and you think of a joke being in a certain part of the house, and you give it a really vivid, weird mental image to do with the words in the joke, and you picture that mental image in parts of your house walking through it, and apparently that works. I've tried it. I find it really hard to do, but apparently it's really easy when you get the hang of it, which sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty good kind of idea. It's not something I've tried. I mean, I've heard about Gary sort of speaking about that before.
Yeah, I've seen an interview where he mentioned it. Apparently it's from Sherlock, or it's mentioned in Sherlock, apparently.
Yeah, Sherlock's Mind Palace. That's
right.
A little bit of Conan Doyle. Can't beat it. Right, so just in kind of wrapping up, what would you say is, what's your favourite joke that you've written? Not necessarily the one that's got best reaction, most retweets, anything like that, but just your personal favourite.
Favourite. I do. Oh, it's quite a few. My initial thought would be this one, perhaps. I told my doctor, I said, I've got a problem with the hearing in one of my ears. He said, are you sure? I said, yes, I'm definite. Always like that one. It tends to be a kind of bit of a delay and then a laugh, which I really like.
But that's one of those ones which is kind of what I'm going to ask you next. It's like, that is just so simple. The word definite being broken down into definite. Yeah. It's like one of those ones where you just think, why could I not have written that? You know, it's so simple, but it's so good.
Thank you. It's been ripped off quite a lot online. It's one of those ones, when something does really well, occasionally like, maybe I shouldn't have tweeted that, because it sends it out into the world. And I've seen, Facebook pages and meme pages since that I've seen it and taken it. So that sucks. I still do it. But it does come with the territory if you're going to do it. It's the only thing, it's the only downside.
So do you ever worry about that? Like, because we know about Julian and his Scandinavian joke. But like, for something like that that's been made into like memes and has been posted all over the internet, like, if you do it in a live setting, people think, I've heard that or I've seen that as a meme. Does that ever sort of concern you? Or?
Yeah, it does concern me. I've just pressed on half the time and just done them, because I think, well, I still wrote it. If it was really ridiculous, I remember Julian's one was everywhere. Then maybe I'd reconsider. It is part of it. Twitter's great for self-promotion, perfectly suited for one-liners, but you kind of your own worst enemy in a way, because if something does well, it's like, oh great, it's really funny, but also people start to take it. People send their friends, which is what jokes are for.
So what about just finally? What about a joke that you've heard that you thought, I wish I'd written that? Your favourite sort of joke that someone else has written?
Sure, there are loads. I'm gonna say a Milton Jones joke, which I'm going to absolutely crucify. But here we go. This is my version of it. My auntie Jean has got a sister called Jean. Her daughter, Jean, just had a baby, called it Jean. They went to a nightclub to celebrate. They got to the door and the bouncer said, sorry, you're all wearing trainers.
It's just
brilliant.
Yeah, it's so daft, and it's just, I mean, it's just Milton Jones, really. But yeah, that's a great line, or a great joke. I really enjoyed that one. But anyway, Daniel, thank you very much for coming on and chatting with us. It's been lovely having a little sort of half-hour chat with you about just all things puns, all things jokes, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. Been a pleasure. Cheers, Iain.
Cheers, man.